Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Carolina Photography Podcast. Today, we're talking about, I don't want to turn this into a versus show, but it's another versus show. It is Adobe Premiere Pro video editing software versus Final Cut video editing software, or Final Cut S. I think some do call it 10. I've never really got a proper good clarification because it jumped over 8 and 9, but whatever's. That's the battle. That's the show off. That is the show off. That's the showdown. And there are pros and cons, as you might expect, for both. And we've got arguments for and against both coming right up here on today's show. I'm your host, Yeager. Follow me at Carolina Photography on Instagram if you are so inclined, as well as Carolina Photography on YouTube. There's a S behind Carolina. And we're online homing, living online homing. Man, I am not talking well today. The online home of Carolina Photography is photog17.com, where you can see all of our shots and things like that, and links to everything else is all in one convenient place. I gotta say, video editing is one of my favorite things to do. I've gotten into it like in 06. I will have some possibly biased sounding opinions at the end of the show, but my first video editor, I'm looking at the box right now from 2006. I still have it in a corner of the room. Final Cut Studio is what got me into it. The first big paid for app. It was maybe $1,200 at the time. That was considered fairly cheap in 06 to have a full functioning studio of a video editor, DVD burner, and making software, sound software, as well as motion included into that. And that's the graphic text making and video making and moving around images software that all came in this great bundle known as Final Cut Studio. It was, there's a lot of star power behind every app I'm talking about today, but speaking of star power, I just want to say it doesn't have to be these big known apps like Final Cut or Premiere. It can be something much smaller and simpler that you might not have heard of. I've Googled so many free apps right now, and that's all it took was a few seconds before recording this podcast. You can have some free apps that don't tax your system, your computer, your PC, your GPU, CPU. It doesn't tax it so much. It's not so hard on a computer. If you don't have one that's like the newer end computers, or if you don't have that super expensive rig, you don't really need it. It's what I compare to seeing maybe your favorite athlete wear shoes that you like, or some of your celebrities wear an outfit that you really like and you want a version of it. Go ahead and get that knockoff. You don't have to get the one that they exactly had. And by knockoff, I mean somebody who might have, had a similar design, not a intellectual property stealing thief who's claiming to be. Not that kind of knockoff. Get something similar, and a lot of these apps can get the same. And if they're free, try a bunch and see what you like. Yeager, that's a time sink. Yeah, editing is a time sink in general, so definitely get used to the idea. But who knows, you might get Koi Bobo's editing app, and that might be your favorite editor, and you might go to town making projects with that editor, and you might do 3 movies off that editing software. I can't tell you that's not possible, so give it a shot. It could very well be possible. Now, if you want something with I'm going to contradict myself here, something that's got the quote-unquote clout in the streets or something like that, it's Avid. We were talking about Final Cut and Adobe Premiere Pro today. No. Avid is probably the most used editing software, and they've got a free version, most used in Hollywood. Let's clarify. And they've got a free version that you can get started on. Also, DaVinci Resolve, I don't know, it only won awards for color grading. So kind of a big deal. What kind of award? Something called an Oscar. You seriously can get these apps and get your hands on these apps absolutely free. So how about that? I go from telling you to get something that's not with all the clout in the world and best known for this or that, but I'm telling you about Oscar-winning software and software that cuts Oscar-winning movies. And you got access to those for free. So swerve. Adobe Premiere Pro and Final Cut, we're going to get to you in a second, but I want you to be aware that you have so many options in editing. But some of that software is a bit on the taxing side, so that's why I said in the beginning to go, maybe go with something that is not so taxing on a computer and does not require your computer have, it doesn't take great specs, but it takes a little bit of specs, like dual cores and things like that, to kind of get rolling. My 2010 MacBook Pro that died could not handle DaVinci Resolve. It just The app just wouldn't even work. So there was no starting. And Avid was Avid. And that's another podcast altogether. So what we're here for, Premiere Pro versus Final Cut S. Let's start off. I've got a list right here. I hate really doing these things as lists, but that's the way to do this. This is sort of a face-off. And then I'll wrap it up with my final thoughts here at the end. We're almost through this podcast. Thanks for listening to the Carolina Photography Podcast. Subscribe if you have not. First off, Final Cut Pro S only works on Mac. So if you've got a PC, this decision's made for you. And if you've got a PC and a Mac, Adobe Premiere Pro PP can work across both platforms, which I've never tried that. I could be in a situation to try that at some point. I have not been in one where I've wanted to really move projects around, depending on how big the project is. I don't even want to do updates if I'm in the middle of a project. So, but that's the option that you have. The second thing I want to go over, that monthly subscription to me is expensive for Premiere Pro by itself, as without, looking at the sale regular price is like $20, 99 cents. But really, what are you going to do with just Premiere Pro? You're going to need After Effects. You can use Photoshop for making thumbnails if you're making YouTube videos. And if you have some photo stuff that you will get into, hey, Lightroom, we kind of need you. You want those motion graphics? Premiere Pro can do a little bit, but After Effects. So then you're in a $50 to $70 a month package. Now, the trade-off is you get constant updates. Okay, it updates regularly. When with Final Cut, you pay that one-time fee of around $300, and then you could also need motion, which was around $50, I think, or more. And compressor was $50, which is the software that is used to put your projects into a file format that needs to be H2, CX4, CX5. It doesn't need to be a Blu-ray file for a Blu-ray disc. Those apps, and Adobe's got their version Media Composer, will do that for you. So you need all of those things at some point. And the 7-day free trial is absolutely a joke with Adobe. I don't think Final Cut does a trial, or maybe it does. I checked, and things keep flipping around and changing all the time. So, but I just recently looked at Adobe as I'd having this conversation. 7 days is not enough to learn this software. That's a joke. It's a farce. And people will say, well, go ahead and hop in it if you're getting jobs to edit. Then go ahead and get the editing. Well, you got to learn how to work this stuff, and that's not an ideal situation to try to learn how to work these things when someone's a client that you've taken on. And I mean, this situation is going to happen where you got to do new stuff and try to pull things off. That's going to happen. But this is just starting out. Sort of laughable. Come on. You need a month or more with all of these apps, in my opinion, including Final Cut. So in price rise, if you're running a business at $300 for Final Cut, you're going to get your updates until they do something else with Final Cut S, and you'll be set at $300. So that could be feasible, and that 70 or so a month, or we'll say 20 or so a month, is going to add up. You're going to get around that price point in a year where I guess if Final Cut was doing like yearly updates, it would balance out. Final Cut's just going to be cheaper. I failed math, but Final Cut is just going to be cheaper for you. The third thing, though, to move on to is Final Cut Pro S. If you're a new user, it's got a more inviting appearance. It looks way more like iMovie or a phone app. And coming from iMovie, it's just perfect to go to Final Cut S. It is, in my personal opinion, some of the bias I predicted I will get into at the end of the show is that it's weird because Premiere Pro looks like the more logical successor to the original Final Cut Pro. There was a redesign in 2011, more on that later, in turning Final Cut Pro, which was being numbered 6 and 7, into S, a redesign that today feels like Premiere Pro is how it looks, and Final Cut Pro S looks like iMovie, which we've all used iMovie. Everyone gets started on iMovie. I have zero jokes to make about iMovie. I actually love the software. You'll hit our wall, though, and find out just how limiting it is, and then it's going to be time to hop on something else. And when you hit that wall, when you can't move that graphic where you want it in an iMovie, you're going to know good and well it's going to be time for another editing app of some sort and all the software that goes along with it. Also, with Final Cut 10, the magnetic timeline takes a little bit of getting used to. And what that is you move something and it automatically can snap. It can be turned off, but the hole you leave can be snapped and fill in the timeline. And how you use it, I've seen editors get really creative with how they use this thing. The magnetic timeline is 2 podcasts to talk about. Some people still hate it. Some people like it. I used it very little after coming off of Final Cut for my daily use, but I can see it being good. It's not a gimmick. It isn't like the touch bar on a MacBook. A total gimmick. I will debate that all day long. Complete gimmick of that touch bar on those things on the newer MacBooks. The magnetic timeline is actually quite useful. I see using it. I do snap type stuff in Premiere Pro, not to the extent of that magnetic timeline and some of the audio tricks that Final Cut has. Awesome. So really, if we go back over this, who gets the edge so far? Premiere Pro, because it's on both consoles. I'm thinking video games. It's on both platforms, PC and Mac. That monthly subscription is high, so I'm going to give that to Final Cut. The third thing is just, if you're a brand new user, it's going to be Final Cut to hop into. Those Adobe apps are intimidating, even for a guy like me when I hopped into them in 2017. I've only been using editing apps since 2006. And I said the thing looks like the app I used to use. Still, it's a lot to get into, but they do have some learning panels in the Premiere Pro, and Final Cut's got some tutorials. Also, there's a ton of online tutorials to go over. The magnetic timeline's its own thing. That's not really much to compare to right there. So, I mean, is that even? Is that even? FCP. Yeah. Okay, there's a lot of draws. Which it's pretty much like how I figured this would go. It'd just be a bunch of draws. We're gonna about wrap this up here right now. Let me just get this phone to stop ringing on me while I'm trying to read off of it. Also, Final Cut Pro S is kind of optimized to work on laptops a little bit better. As far as MacBook laptops, since that's the only one that's going to work on, it can really do 4K on newer computers. 2016 17s are editing 4K footage, which is nice. And I don't believe people were using proxies for the most part. I've seen some that use proxies, which is another thing you'll learn about in editing. This is why you need those media coder and compressor apps I was talking about. Proxy files can get kind of huge. The proxy files, the point of those is to shrink those larger files. So proxies are one thing to go over. Also, what you want to look at is the audio capabilities of Final Cut Pro S. It's probably more user-friendly there. It sounds like Final Cut Pro is winning this thing, but Premiere Pro, you can do almost anything a dedicated sound app could do, like Audition, not quite as deep as Audition, Adobe Audition as their sound editing app, or Logic. But man, you can get a lot, and there's a lot of plugins available for Final Cut too. So, with background renderings constant with Final Cut, you can export even faster. All right, very, very important there. Rendering times used to be a thing. You used to couldn't watch your timeline without rendering back in the day of Final Cut 7. X fixes this, but you can also do a bit of a light render. That's not a term, but it does a bit of a render in Premiere Pro, so you're not really sitting there waiting on that either, especially on newer machines, and it'll just render for the final project. So to render for the final project in Premiere Pro while Final Cut's just constantly rendering, and it can shoot it out a bit faster, is how I understand it. My computer knowledge can fall apart pretty quick. And Final Cut kind of loses in the fact that with Premiere you can do round robin, as in you can have teams work on projects and only open specific things, or have only specific team members open up parts of projects. Adobe plays well with its other apps. It's got a ton of them for that $50, $70, if you don't get it on sale, price range that can get in, and student discount can also affect the price. Just remember that. So you can get a real large size team now. They've put an emphasis on that with Adobe, where Final Cut isn't quite there. It used to be in 7, but no, not much anymore. and you can work on projects over a network with Premiere Pro. But I do love both of these pieces of software. I bought Final Cut Pro 7. This is where my wrapping up ending bias can kick in at. I bought that one for $1,200 or so, and now with Premiere Pro, I had to jump off the Final Cut train and ship rather and just try to swim to Premiere Pro in 2011 like a lot of editors did when they changed over and dropped so many features. The problems with Final Cut X when it launched, it should have just been named another product. It really wasn't Final Cut as professional editors knew it. You can even import your older projects you were working in into the new software. It was a nightmare. A lot of people who had their vacation planned, editors, just had to cancel it and spend their time learning new software. Like I said, this software does not take a week to learn. It takes time to learn these new pieces of software and to get your workflow up, which is something else to consider when working with all these things. How are you going to get this video footage off the cameras, and how are you going to receive it, get it to be categorized, then actually edit it, and then export it? Where all does it need to go? Your workflow has to change up a bit when you go from software to software. So when that happened in 2011, I stayed with that older Final Cut software for years. I'm talking years, because I only got into Premiere in 2017. So what, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16? That's just 5 years to hang out with software not up to snuff. The problem, though, was, well, problem's not the word, but the thing is when I had to get back into it heavy because I've dipped out a little bit and wasn't using it as constantly. And for YouTubing almost daily, there wasn't as many podcasts. Actually, was podcast. Soundtrack Pro was their sound editor. I could use that. The video projects were sort of sporadic, so I can get away with it. If it was like a wedding video, that I could finagle it after years of working in Final Cut. But I mean, the wall just came. The writing was always on the wall, and it just got hit. So in 2017, the full jump to Adobe. I'm talking Photoshop, Lightroom, the video editor, all of them, that whole package. It happened. And tutorials were pretty easy to get to. They're pretty readily available on YouTube. So it was time for that jump. That is why I've got, I wouldn't say animosity towards Apple. Well, I do not get that decision to this day. The number of users they lost over that decision to change Final Cut so drastically, I think they are still not really feeling it. It's not like the company's hurting it, but yeah, it was a paradigm switch. Guys, I can't use words. It was a big switch and shift for an industry, and Final Cut really had a lot of loyal users. I still like the software, but yeah, it sent me over to Adobe, and I've got Media Composer on the computer. I did not get a chance to download the DaVinci Resolve onto my new machine. I plan to do that, so I like to dabble in all of them. So, in conclusion, I feel like if you're newer to editing software, Final Cut's for you. You're a little bit more professional, for lack of a better word. Professional as in you're working, not getting hired constantly, but you're making videos often, YouTube and things like that. Or maybe you are working constantly. You're getting hired a ton, and some team aspect can come into play, and both get a lot of freebies online too. But oh boy, I just feel like you're doing a little bit more with Adobe software. That one's going to be for you. So get your hands on both if you can. Try those trials out. Just to dap your toe in there and maybe try out a month of Premiere. It's going to take a month to really learn and see how you're going to go with that. And if possible, we can get your hands on Final Cut with a trial. If someone else you might know might have it, definitely spend some time with it. It's going to take time. So those are my thoughts on this Final Cut versus Adobe Premiere Pro. I just throw their words in there. I'm starting to get tired here. This podcast was supposed to be short. I failed miserably. I might have split it into two parts for Instagram if we throw it on there. But thanks for checking it out. I am Yeager. Online home of Carolina's Photography is photo17.com. Links to the Instagrams there. It's got a large photography spoiler as well as YouTube. And sign up for our tips and tricks Facebook group. It is called The Shot Callers. The Shot Callers, available now on Facebook. I will talk with you next time on the show. Thanks for hanging out with me. It took a lot to get through this Versus, because this is kind of a big deal. This is supposed to be the home of those other moving picture, still picture, and moving picture tips, but man, this one right here really does matter in the moving pictures thing, and it's gonna get talked about a lot. This is not really that much of a off the beaten path topic, but I had to hop on it because it's one of my favorite things. I'm about to go hop in the editor right now as I open up the door. All right, everybody, have a good one.